If you've ever played a video game before, chances are you fought a boss before too. And I'm sure you did very well. Congratulations, I'm proud of you. Generally speaking, bosses in video games are supposed to be a difficult challenge that tests the skills you've learned and developed over the course of the game. They're meant to be challenging, and ideally they are fun and satisfying to beat. That's the goal. Some do this better than others, admittedly. In Geometry Dash, bosses aren't generally like that, because what I just described to you applies to demon levels. In a sense, demon levels are Geometry Dash's boss levels. But that's not what we're talking about today. Today, we're talking about boss fights. Levels that feature an enemy character of sorts whose attacks you have to avoid. Sometimes you even fight back, too. I probably couldn't have telegraphed this video any harder, considering my most recent uploads, but it's only fair as the final boss of GD YouTube, right? I know the entire community is left quaking in their boots every time I upload a new video. But yeah, let's talk about boss fights. There's an argument to be made that club step monsters technically count as a boss fight, and you know, I'm not gonna say you're wrong if that's what you want to argue, but for the purposes of this video, I want to talk about dynamic, interactive boss fights. By which I mean bosses that move around and fire projectiles and stuff at you. Which, naturally, leads us to Deadlocked. I actually quite like Deadlocked, in large part because it was such a revolutionary level in GD's history. It had stuff moving around, it had keys and locks, and, of course, it had monsters that shoot laser beams. They shoot freaking laser beams, dude. But this is only a small little interlude. This confrontation lasts all of 5 seconds before it's over. It's a tasteful addition, I'd say. But this is what opened the floodgates. The introduction of the move trigger and the brief example shown in Deadlocked were all the ingredients needed to spark the birth of a new genre of levels. And, you know, having played a bunch of them over the past couple days, there's a few things I've noticed about them. Most of them are, like, really bad. Boss fights in Geometry Dash just don't really act like boss fights in the traditional sense. They don't test your skills as a player. That's what demon levels do, as I already mentioned. Well, I mean, boss fights can do that too, but that's often secondary to the primary challenge they offer, and that's simply figuring out the pattern. Surprise! A lot of the time, boss fight levels are just memory levels in disguise. And the process of figuring out the memory level just isn't very satisfying, because any progress you make is completely arbitrary. Especially when it comes to boss fights, when you're done memorizing, it just ends up feeling incredibly lame, because you're not interacting with the boss at all. Not really. The interaction is just an illusion, because the boss is going to do the exact same thing every single time anyway. You're going through the motions and the boss is just set dressing. And I think some creators have realized this, because sometimes they either de-emphasize the boss's attacks. Like in this part in B, for example, I don't think the boss can hit you at all, actually. Or they just put in arrows in the level to guide your path, to show you exactly where you need to go. But all that accomplishes is that it just makes the boss even less interactive than before. Like, compare the Colossus to something like Gobble Gut. Super Mario Galaxy 2. I'm sure you know this guy. He's actually kinda hard when you first get to him. I remember playing this on a demo in the store. There was another kid there and I was all like, "Step aside, nerd. I'm going to show you how a real pro gamer handles this." And I could not beat this guy. It was fun though. Mario games are generally pretty fun. Anyway, I'm getting off track. In the Colossus, you cannot predict what the boss is going to do. It says what attack the boss is going to do at the top of the screen here, but fuck if I know what the hell a plasma burst is going to do. You slowly inch your way forward, meticulously figuring out where exactly you have to fly to dodge all of the attacks in order. The boss doesn't adapt to your movements at all. It never throws you a curveball. You don't even have to think about the boss at all when you're done memorizing. The conflict feels completely artificial. It doesn't feel like you're fighting a boss at all. Now, this is not the case with Gobble Gut. Gobble Gut responds to your movement around the planet and always charges directly at you. You have to be on the move constantly to avoid them. On top of that, you have to be mindful of his positioning when you're going to attack his weak spots, because if you just blindly charge in, he's just going to hit you and stun you, preventing you from doing any damage. I wouldn't say Gobble Gut is peak boss design or anything, but there's an interesting dynamic going on here at least. The boss and the player interact with each other in a meaningful way here, and that makes it feel like a real struggle. As far as I'm concerned, this lack of interactivity is a fatal flaw in Geometry Dash boss design. Geometry Dash bosses exist in an awkward paradox where no matter what you do, the boss is always going to fail in some way. If you make it too hard, then the memorization aspect is a huge pain in the ass. It makes the boss tedious to figure out. If it's too easy, then it becomes Titanium Buster. This boss is so incredibly lame, dude. Just look at this. I'm just sliding, hardly doing anything. Despite how intimidating it looks, the boss is completely unthreatening, especially compared to the rest of the level. Not that Titanium Buster is particularly hard, but the difficulty drops like a rock when you get to the boss. That's so anticlimactic. Either way, there doesn't seem to be a happy middle ground here. No matter what, the boss itself just doesn't feel like a real dynamic threat. So, what do we do about this? Can we do anything about this? Are there examples out there of good boss fight levels? Well, actually, while I was playing levels for this video, I came across two that really surprised me. I've cynically said in the past that boss fights can't be done right, but there's always room to prove me wrong. It happened with memory levels too. The first one I surprisingly liked was I Spy with My Little Eye. Now, I Spy with My Little Eye is a very easy level, even by easy demon standards. It's a total cakewalk, but I think that works to its benefit here, because it means the boss itself doesn't feel like a huge letdown, even when you do sight read it perfectly on the first try. In fact, I'd say the little cube part before it is probably still a little too hard in comparison, if only because the jumps are a little hard to gauge when the platforms move around like this. But other than that, it allows for a lot of room to just enjoy the spectacle of the level, which I think it does really well. The boss doesn't feel particularly threatening, but it's also a lot of fun to dodge its attacks, and to look at all the flashy lights and effects as you do it, barring the overuse of the shake trigger. It also helps that it properly telegraphs its attacks, so reacting actually becomes possible, like every other part of the level. It would have been incredibly annoying to be able to play the entire level normally, but then have to go into practice when you get to the boss just to memorize its pattern, especially since its pattern is actually super easy to execute. So yeah, I Spy with My Little Eye is a level that I think has the formula down. There's one other though, and this one has to be my favorite. Shoutouts to Sirius for pointing me to this level, because I either completely missed it or I completely forgot about it. And without it, this video would have been horrifically incomplete. Unequivocally, the best boss fight level I've played is Serpents Wrath. I'll be honest, I was incredibly skeptical when I first realized what this level was doing. For those out of the loop, this level has a pseudo-randomization system similar to Limbo to randomize the boss's attack patterns. Now, this makes for a very unique experience in Geometry Dash. There's two bosses here. The first one is pretty easy to figure out, but it's the final boss where the true challenge of the level lies. It has a lot of different attacks with a lot of little variations too. It really takes time to get a feel for each attack, to react to its tells, to know what to look out for. No two encounters are the same, so you really need to focus and react in the heat of the moment. It's like you're fighting an actual boss. I initially thought it might feel cheap, but as I got a little better, bit by bit, it felt really satisfying. It felt like my practice was paying off and I was actually getting better at avoiding it. The boss actually felt threatening because it isn't just set dressing here. It's a fundamental interactive aspect of the gameplay. I think if you're designing a boss fight in Geometry Dash, then Serpents Wrath should be the gold standard to aim for. This is still quite unexplored territory, but it will become a lot more accessible once the random trigger is released, and you don't have to rely on these wave spam parts for your randomization anymore. On top of that though, I also just really like Serpents Wrath for its general theming and decoration. It's like Indiana Jones, a hidden temple lined with treasure, protected by a huge ass Harry Potter snake. That's just cool, man. I don't know what to tell you. I also think this level nails the difficulty balancing too. It's not a particularly hard level, but the final boss is harder than the rest of the level. It is the central challenge of this level, and that feels appropriate. So yeah, those are my thoughts on boss fights. Bossfights. Big shout out to my first Grandpa Demon Patreon subscriber, Xkami. You are awesome, thank you so much. Oh, I was minutes away from rendering this video until I got a notification that somebody else subscribed to my Patreon as well. As a Grandpa Demon, no less. Thank you very much, Belfry Clock. You are also awesome. In case you didn't know, I did recently open a Patreon in case you want to support my very important work here. I do put in the effort, after all, and you do get some minor benefits. Also, only 2 more months before my creator contest draws to a close. Things are getting pretty exciting on that front too. Anyway, thanks for watching everyone, and see you next time.